This video is brought to you by Sayorite. Visit Sayorite.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions. In this video, we will show you some of the steps required to reupholster a back-to-back lounge recliner seat. This type of seat is used as a helm seat in Brian's 1982 Regal 245 XL Ambassador powerboat, Sayorite's project boat for 2016. As often is the case, the wooden base and the backer boards of the old seat are rotted and in need of replacing. Brian will remove the seat from the boat, remove the old vinyl, and use the old rotted wood as a template to make a wooden base and backer boards. He will then assemble the new base and prep the backer boards for reupholstery. We will not be showing Brian doing that, but rather will highlight the reupholstery of the base and the seats using supplies from Sayorite. Since the wood was rotten, Brian used a marine plywood and then painted the surface to prolong its life. He has now assembled the base and it's ready to reupholster. Cindy will show us how it's done. Here's Cindy.
Okay, we're ready to start on the base for the captain's seat for Brian's boat. So I've got my vinyl laid with the right side down here on the table. And I'm going to trace all the way around the four sides to get a pattern to cover this outside area of the base. So I'm just going to trace along the edge all the way around this piece. Give yourself a couple inches here and at the top to work with when you get ready to pull it around. I'm also going to go around this cutout kind of roughly, and when I actually cut the vinyl, I'm going to give myself a couple of inches in here to work with also.
She's moved the platform and adds 2 inches at the top and the bottom so that she can roll it around and staple it.
And I'm going to go ahead and mark a 1/2 inch seam here so that I remember not to cut it on this line before I move on to the next piece.
4 panels will be sewn together around the perimeter of our frame. This 1/2 inch seam allowance put on both sides will allow for that seam. Cindy flips the platform so she can trace the opposite side and repeat that same procedure.
Since these two ends are the same, I'm going to mark this one with a 1 and this one with a 2, just in case the wood isn't exactly the same.
The 2 ends look exactly the same, but they're probably not. That's why she labels them with a 1 and a 2. And then she'll label her panels, her fabric panels on the back side with a 1 and a 2 as well. So she knows exactly where they go on the platform. Even though she's tracing around the perimeter of the platform exactly as it lays, she'll need to add approximately 2 inches at the top and 2 inches at the bottom to roll around the wood and staple it in place. And then on the 2 sides, which will be seamed together to the other panels, she adds a 1/2 inch seam allowance. The marine quality vinyl from Sayorite can be cut with scissors. She'll cut out all 4 of the panels in preparation for sewing, which is coming up next. She'll also cut out the center here where there's access underneath the platform, leaving approximately 2 inches around the perimeter so that it can be folded back and stapled to our wood platform. Coming up next, we'll sew these 4 panels together, making our vinyl cover for the base.
So this is number 2 over here. So I want to make sure number 2 panel ends up here.
By placing the panels on the platform, we can assure that they are correctly orientated.
So I'm going to stitch from where this pencil line starts to where it stops, and I want to make sure that I have it matched up with the pencil line on the other side. And I'm going to stitch right along my pencil line.
We'll sew along that line with a straight stitch that's approximately 6 millimeters in length. We'll do some reversing at the beginning here to lock the stitch in place. Then when we reach the other side, we'll do some reversing there as well. This is our first stitch. Our second stitch, or top stitch, will complete the seam. Completing a seam like this is called a semi-flat felled seam.
And to make this seam a little bit stronger, I'm going to top stitch it and I'm going to press both of the seams to the side panel and stitch with the edge of my presser foot against the seam.
Take your time to carefully guide this top stitch so the presser foot is right up against the first stitch. This stitch will be visible. Do some reversing at the beginning and the end to lock your stitch in place. Here's what it looks like on the underside.
Now I can add the other side panel to it, and I need to make sure that I have this at the top. And I'm going to do the same process with all of these seams.
At all 4 corners, that same procedure will be followed yet again. We will not show all of this.
Now I can add the last panel on, and just making sure that you have the top at the same place with the wide part the same as the wide part on this one. I'm ready to join this last seam together. And just make sure that you don't get anything twisted and you have a circle here.
The final step is the last top stitch. She checks to make sure the flap on the underside is off to the side where she will sew that top stitch. Before we place this vinyl on the base, we're going to add a thin layer of foam called polyurethane foam with fabric backing to it. This will give it a better looking appearance.
We're going to add a layer of 1/4 inch sew foam to the outside of this to keep the rough edges from cutting through the vinyl. So I'm going to do some rough measurements to cut my initial pieces of sew foam. So I want the 2 sides to be about 42 by 17. And 2 pieces to be about 29 by 17.
What Cindy refers to as sew foam, we call at the Sarat website and in the catalog polyurethane foam with fabric backing. We carry it in a 1/4 inch, a 1/2 inch, and 3/4 inch. Here, we're using the 1/2 inch. To glue it, we'll use 3M Super 77 spray adhesive.
So I'm going to spray both surfaces a little bit and press it up against the wood.
We typically like to spray the adhesive on the side of the foam that has the fabric backing. We also like to spray the solid surface with the glue as well. Cindy's careful to line up the bottom. She doesn't want to wrap the foam around the bottom because that will be up against the deck of the boat. So the foam surface is on the outside. The fabric surface is on the inside. She'll use an electric kitchen knife to trim the foam to size. You can also use scissors, but an electric kitchen knife works best. That same procedure will be followed for all of the sides of our platform. When adhering the foam, try to keep the bottom even. If you make mistakes, you can sometimes pull it up and reapply it without damaging the foam. If you do this, try to do it as quickly as possible so that you can make adjustments. Smooth everything down nice and flat. The foam has been applied to all 4 sides. Now Cindy will address the hole for the access underneath the seat.
On this edge right here, we just want enough left of the sew foam to pull around this edge. So I'm going to draw a line about the same distance all the way around and then cut.
The line she struck down can actually be seen through the sew foam. So here she's using an electric kitchen knife to trim along that black permanent marker line that she struck on the opposite side of the sew foam. Here's a view from the inside. Along the top edge, we left about 2 inches of extra foam. We don't need all that foam, we just need enough to wrap around the top edge of the board. Cindy will go around with scissors, trimming it so that it will fold nicely over the edge of the board here. We do not want excess foam on the back side where the vinyl will be stapled. However, if we had a little bit, it probably would not affect much. When the vinyl fabric is placed around this platform, it will be wrapped around the top edge. She wants the foam to cover any obstacle that has to be covered with the vinyl fabric. So any struts or any brackets here that are made from wood, she cuts around those so that the foam covers those. Along these sharp edges, the vinyl fabric that will cover the foam will take a smooth transition. And if it's abraded, the vinyl fabric that is, the foam will help protect it at those sharp edges.
Okay, we have all of our sew foam applied all the way around and trimmed the way that we want it to. I'm going to turn this over and start from the bottom side because this is a smaller side, so we'll pull it on from the bottom.
Next, we'll pull the cover over the base and staple it around the edges. Now Cindy carefully positions the vinyl that she sewed earlier onto that base. This will be a rather tight fit, and that is what we designed it to be, so this will take a little bit of work to get it into position. Here at the corners you can see the semi-flat felled seam looks beautiful, and it lays perfectly on each one of the four corners.
We're ready to start attaching our vinyl to the base piece, and I'm going to wrap it around and staple it from the back.
Just create slits around obstacles and staple the vinyl in place.
Okay, I'm going to trim a little bit out here so that when I fold this over, it's not quite so bulky.
At each corner, it is traditionally required that excess fabric be cut away. You just do not want to cut so much fabric away that a slit shows up. So be careful when you do that.
That's better.
This is the bottom side of the base. Creating slits and taking out excess fabric so it lays nicely, and then stapling it in place. Here at this corner, she'll make a wedge out of the fabric so it takes this turn a little bit smoother. So a triangular wedge is cut out of the vinyl. We're going to skip ahead here and now flip the base over so that we're working on the top edge, the edge that will actually be up when the base is installed to the deck of the boat.
Okay, we're going to start on the top edge of this seat base, and I want to trim around these boards and bring the vinyl into here so we protect the top edge of this board as we did the bottom.
As she cuts to accommodate this obstacle, notice she cuts slits only so deep, then checks, then recuts if necessary, so the cut does not go too deep and become exposed. Since the bottom edge is secured, she'll need to pull the fabric taut as she staples this top edge. The actual top ledge will not really be visible since there'll be a cushioned platform placed on top of it, but we still want to try to make it look as best as possible, so we're making sure that the slit does not go deeper than the top edge of the platform or base. You can see clearly here how the polyurethane foam with fabric backing that is laid underneath of our vinyl makes these edges and transitions look nice and smooth and rounded in appearance rather than a rigid turn. Here at this corner, just like we did on the underside, we'll cut away some of the excess fabric so that the fabric lays here without a lot of bulk.
Here's an inside turn. These areas are rather tricky as the vinyl does not want to take the dip or inside turn well. Cindy made a slit in the vinyl fabric going for the center of the curve, but stopped short in an effort to cover the top edge of the base. As she finishes the turn at this corner, as shown earlier, let's discuss an option regarding inside turns and vinyl fabrics. Carefully heating the vinyl with a heat gun can typically help resolve the issues of inside curves. However, we are not going to show that in this video. We will post another video showing how to accomplish that task in the future, so be watching for it. For this seat, we're simply going to pull the vinyl down as close as possible to the inside corner, because we will use Hitem GIMP on the edge of the board, and that will pull the vinyl down and also give it the upholstered look we're looking for. Here's a look ahead at us using the Hitem GIMP. We'll show more of this a little bit later on in the video. Now simply trim away the excess material around the base on the inside. You can use a razor blade or scissors. Under our helm seat is an opening in the base for the storage of gear. We've already cut away the vinyl fabric to accommodate for this opening. As you can see, we left several inches to wrap to the back side and staple in place to the board. Here is yet another inside curve, which we will do just like we did earlier. We will show only doing one of the 4 for this rectangular opening. Again, we're opting not to use a heat gun here, but rather we'll apply Hitem GIMP over the edge after we have the vinyl pulled as close as possible to the inside corners of this opening. In an attempt to get this vinyl closer to that corner, she's going to create yet one more slit in the vinyl. That will allow it to hug the corner. Not perfectly, but as close as possible. This next chapter will show using Hitem GIMP as a trim around the edges of our opening and inside turns.
We're ready to finish up this seat base, and the mechanism that makes this whole thing work is all attached to this board. And when you lay it in here, you can see that it's going to rub on this area. So we're going to do a little more cutting and add this GIMP to this top edge to help protect it. The other thing that happens is when this seat comes out and is extended, it does rub on that area underneath here. So it'll also help with the wear and tear on that area. So I'm going to trim this one in just a little bit more, make a couple more cuts so it lays better into this corner before I put the GIMP on top of it.
Cindy will remove a few staples here because she thinks she can pull the vinyl in place better. Placing a staple along this top edge is okay, mainly because we're going to be covering it with the Hitem GIMP coming up next. The Hitem GIMP opens up, revealing the center, and a staple can be installed along its opening, and then the 2 edges, which are folded under, will fold back, concealing the staples that install the Hitem GIMP to your application. Cindy will open up the Hitem GIMP, revealing the staple that was installed in the middle of the Hitem GIMP. This Hitem GIMP should help protect the vinyl cover on the base from the abrasion that the seat's bottom may inflict. The Hightem GIMP will also be installed along the storage opening's edge in the same manner. We're starting the Hightem GIMP along the top here so the joint will not be visible when it is flipped right side up. Since we're not using a heat gun, a few more slits will allow the vinyl to come closer to the edge of the wood as we staple the Hightem GIMP in place over the top. Now we'll flip the base around so that we're working with it upside down and work on that joint. Basically, we staple all the way to the joint, cut so that the Hightem GIMP is butted up against the starting position, and then place a staple right in the center of the assembly, joining those two halves together almost perfectly. There we go. Hightem GIMP is now installed. The seat has already been disassembled off camera, so let's use this illustration to show how the seat was made and the steps we will take to reupholster and reassemble it. In general, reverse the steps required for the disassembly to reupholster the chair. Let's walk you through those steps again. The main backer board is what slides on the base we just upholstered. To it, side bolsters will be attached to the port and starboard sides. Then a secondary backer board, which the actual seat will be upholstered to, will be fitted between the side bolsters and the board permanently attached to the main backer board, completing our seat.
Okay, we're ready to work on the seat base for this boat seat, and this is the front, and it has a little protection along the front and then a piece of vinyl just wrapped around here to start with. And this doesn't have to be cut exactly, we can trim it after we cut it, after we apply it to the board.
The front lip of this board will be visible. She's cutting polyurethane foam with fabric backing to size into strips so it can be stapled along the front edge. Padding the sharp edges of the board will give the vinyl, when it's upholstered on, a smoother look. This main backer board for the seat needs to have the front edge covered with vinyl. Why? Cindy will explain that next.
Now this piece has an armrest that lays over here, a seat cushion here, and another armrest over here. So all this is doing is protecting this front area from wear, and then I'm going to apply another one back here to do the same thing.
Not only does it protect it from wear, but that front edge will be visible. So that's why this strip is approximately 5 or 6 inches in width, so it can wrap around the edge and conceal it, giving it a nice appearance when that edge is visible. And here's what the front edge looks like when it's complete. Coming up, she'll staple a final piece to the back edge. This edge will not be visible. We did not install the polyurethane foam with fabric backing there. Next, we'll pattern and sew the side bolsters.
We're ready to take apart this piece and use it for our patterns, and I've got the front marked here, and I'm going to make a couple of other marks on it so that I get it put back together correctly.
These are the side bolsters that go on the port and starboard side of our seat.
And I'm going to make a mark right here where this seam comes into this piece. And the other thing I'm going to do is add probably a couple inches all the way around the bottom when I cut these pieces out. We're having a little debate here on what type of foam to use here, so we want to make sure I have enough to go over whatever foam we decide to use.
She'll cut apart the old side bolster as a pattern to make the new.
So this is the end that I want to allow a lot extra on.
We want to have plenty of fabric where the side bolsters will be pulled around the side of the board and attached or stapled to the bottom side of the board. So that's why we need excess fabric along the bottom edge of these side bolsters.
And I made a mark right here where this one connects to the other one, so I'm going to transfer that mark also.
These are match-up marks that will be used to help join the panels of the side bolster together to keep us from getting confused. Simply trace around your patterns and include excess fabric where it needs to be pulled under the board.
I'm going to leave this part here where it was cut before. This is probably a cut to go around the board, and I want to do that however it fits with my new piece, not by the old piece.
After patterning, label each piece to aid in knowing where each piece goes when it needs to be sewed together.
We're not going to show it, but we're going to cut these side bolster panels out and then use the ones we cut out to pattern for the opposite side bolsters.
I'm going to cut these again, right or wrong sides together so that I have the opposite side cut before I start to sew.
She'll then transfer the match-up marks and any labeling that she's done previously. Now she'll start to lay panels next to each other where they need to be sewn together. She uses the old pattern to help in enabling her to understand the new patterns.
Okay, that's the first seam right there. So the stitching would stop right here, and this will get finished off when we attach it to the frame. So I'm going to stitch, this is my first seam, I'm going to stitch right to here.
How'd she come up with that? By comparing it to the old piece. She'll take it to the sewing machine and sew a straight stitch about a ½ inch from the raw edges of the fabric. Anywhere a turn needs to be made, she'll make some relief notches in the vinyl so it takes the turn or curve smoothly. By comparing the old pattern where they stopped and started sewing, this is where she needs to end her sewing, and it's important to do some reversing to lock your stitch in place at the beginning and the end of your
The seam
sewing.
was not top stitched before, but I think it'll make it a bit stronger if we go ahead and top stitch it. So I'm going to push both seams to one side and use the edge of my presser foot as the guide right here along the seam.
As she sews this top stitch, notice she's being careful to pull the seam apart so it is laying on that first stitch she made. And she's sewing the flap on the underside, that's the ½ inch flap, on the bottom side so that it's a very nice, secure, semi-flat filled seam.
The next step is to apply the cording to this edge that we just created here. Okay, we added to the bottom of all of these pieces, so this original cording is going to be a little bit too short. So I want to make sure I have plenty of cording, and I'm going to run it from this bottom edge all the way around to this bottom edge.
When sewing the piping, it's best to use a thread that is corresponding or matching the piping as best as possible, so that if any thread shows up, it's not as obvious, or use a clear thread, like Profilin Clear. Notice where the two pieces were sewn together, there's a part sticking out. Cindy obviously wants to create a smooth transition, so she ignores that. The Sailrite Ultrafeed sewing machines have a tunnel built into the standard foot to accommodate the piping. No need to change the foot to a cording foot. If you're sewing with another sewing machine, you'll need to install a cording foot here.
And I need to match up my marks here, and this is supposed to be like this. This will all fit in around here and form the front of the side piece.
You can see now why the matchup marks are so important. It would have been difficult to understand why it rests like this on top of the other piece. Notice she's starting in the center here. That's because she can sew one side, making sure the matchup mark is directly on top of itself, flip it over, and then sew the other side down the other direction. She's sewing right along the piping or cording here. At the end, she'll do a little bit of reversing. Now she'll flip the assembly and start sewing the other direction on the opposite side of the assembly. Notice she did not do any reversing here. That's because she started about 2 inches on top of the last stitch. That secures it and the first portion of that stitch. As she makes this turn, she's being careful to line up the edges as best as possible. Let's take the assembly and turn it right side out and take a look at it.
Now you can see how that angled piece forms this area right here.
We've decided to replace our old foam, so we'll be cutting new foam to size for the side bolsters.
We're going to cut new foam for these side pieces, and we want this to be a little bit bigger than the old one because this is really compressed. So I'm going to give myself about 1/2 inch all the way around.
This 1/2 inch may be a little bit too big. We'll discuss that later on.
And then after we cut that shape, we'll cut this angle into it.
Foam can be cut with an actual professional foam cutting machine, as you see here, or it can be cut with an electric kitchen knife, which we'll show in a few seconds. The discussion of what type of foam should be used is extensive. No matter what type of foam is used, you will always have positives and negative factors to contend with for any outdoor foam selection.
We want this to look similar to this one, but I'm not going to do a bunch of measurements or anything. I'm just going to kind of eyeball that there's a depth here and a depth here. And the same back here. I'm just going to give it a little bit of depth.
Notice the size of this foam compared to the old one. It is much bigger, and it may be a little bit too big. We'll test it in a little bit.
And then match up those 2 lines across the top and across here.
These lines will be used to help guide our knife. Don't have a fancy professional foam cutter? We'll show you now how to use an electric kitchen knife. Notice that Cindy is trying to hold the knife in such a manner so it follows the line on the top and the line on the bottom, trying to achieve the desired cut angle that she wants for the side bolster. We've chosen to use a high-density polyurethane foam for our side bolsters. It will be very firm indeed and last for years, no matter how long the occupant is sitting on it, due to the high density range of this foam. Compare the size of this new foam with the old. It is a little bit too big in my opinion, but we'll test it out by stuffing it into the cover that we made previously and see if we can compress it. Because it is a high density and firm foam, it is very hard to compress it, but it does fit, and we will go ahead and use it being that size. But in retrospect, I believe we would have done better by cutting down the foam size slightly. We want the cover to compress the foam, so the foam should be slightly larger than the cover that's being fit around it for a good fit.
Before we attach those little outside pieces that we just made out here, I'm going to make a line where this piece sets into it. This is what supports the seat, and we're going to cover this with foam and vinyl also.
Our main backer board will have the side bolsters attached to it, and then the secondary backer board will have the seat actually upholstered to it. It will fit in between the side bolsters very snugly. We'll be upholstering our seat bottom on this board she just removed. Before we attach our side bolsters, Cindy evaluates the baseboard and has decided that the corners need some foam
I'm going
padding.
to apply a small piece of this 1/4" sew foam to this corner. When we pulled the vinyl over, this is kind of a sharp edge, so I don't want that to tear through the vinyl eventually.
This foam at the corners will also give the side bolsters a nice transition when it rounds the bottom edge of this base board. It may have been wise to run it along the side completely instead of just the corners. It's now time to attach the side bolsters. Be sure you put it on so that it's facing the right direction.
This is kind of an awkward piece to put back on, so I'm going to just put a couple of staples back here to hold it in place and then see where else I need to work with it.
This job is made easier with 2 people. However, as you see here, it can be done with 1. Your job is to pull the vinyl around the board and staple it to the back side so that it's nice and tight. At this point, we only want a few staples in here, hopefully in the right spot, so we can determine that everything fits appropriately. We can pull them out if it doesn't. And notice that the vinyl cover is a little bit on the small side, and the foam is rather large. She will force the cover over the foam. Would have been a little bit easier if the foam was a little bit smaller. Here along this front edge, we want to staple through 2 layers of the vinyl, so she's folding back a layer, and she will pull that stitch so it's almost down on top of that board that she's stapling it to. She'll start here in the center. In most situations, the vinyl takes a turn and then is stapled on the side of an object. Here, the vinyl comes down and it takes a turn, and then the staples hold it in place. That's why we're going through 2 layers of vinyl, in an effort to hopefully not have the vinyl pull through the staple. Cindy will first install only a few staples along this edge until she is assured that she's happy the way it is fitting. We still have to pull more of the vinyl down, but she believes she can do it, so she starts working on the corners. There's some excess fabric that can be cut out. She cuts along the edge of the piping carefully, creating a slit so the vinyl can be pulled down to the top surface of the board, and then the flap of vinyl can be folded back where she cut it and stapled on the bottom side of the board, so it gives it a finished look where she cut it. A cut or slit is also made on the opposite side of the piping so that the vinyl there can be folded under along the inside edge, so it can be easily stapled down to that top surface of the board. The fold along the top surface of the board will be concealed when the seat bottom is upholstered. The seat bottom will be upholstered to a separate board, and then that board will be pushed down between both side bolsters on the port side and the starboard side. One of 2 things can be done here with the piping. It can be fed into the vinyl, as Cindy is doing here, or it can run straight down along the back side of the board and be stapled on the back side. It's your choice. Cindy's not happy with that, so she's going to use the staple remover and her wire cutters and remove that staple and pull it down a little bit more snugly, if that's a word. When she's happy with the preliminary fit, she's going to go ahead and staple around the entire perimeter, placing staples very close to one another so that the whole side bolster is secured very, very well. let's go to the top surface and take a look at that. Remember, we only put a few staples there to secure this application while we positioned and fitted it. We want to pull those staples out because the vinyl is not pulled down as tight as we'd like. Here's where a second helper would come in handy. One could pull the vinyl, the other one could staple. Before finishing, she's going to check the seat bottom board and make sure that it's going to fit in there. It will fit very snugly inside of the side bolsters, so that's expected. But we believe that we can pressure it in there when it's upholstered. So we'll continue just to staple on that side bolster, completing it. This is the portion of the bolster that's along the back, so hardly anyone's going to see it. But we want to show you what we do here because the seam doesn't come down as far as we'd like. So she's going to fold the fabric back to staple it at that location. Again, this will not be visible as it'll be up against the backrest.
Okay. When this piece is all upholstered, it'll bump right up next to this one and make this a tight fit.
You're looking at it from the rear, not the front. We'll go ahead and staple securely all around the perimeter and then cut away any excess. The following chapter covers the seat, which will be attached to the secondary backer board. The top plate is made of 3 colors of vinyl and sewed together with a French seam or double top stitch. Here's Cindy.
We're ready to do the center section of our seats, and we're going to use the same pattern that we used to create this cushion so that the boat kind of coordinates in different areas. This is the original seat. I'm going to cut it apart but not use this. I do want to cut it apart so that I have these side panels, so I'm going to take the seams out on this right now. Before I get it completely cut apart, I'm going to put a mark so that I know where it goes back together, the 2 pieces. I'm also going to mark the front of this piece. This is the placement that we decided we wanted for this piece. This will, right here will be the channeling, and it'll come up to here. This will be blue, and it'll make this square corner, and then down here will be all tan. So I'm going to draw a line which will be my seam line eventually, but when I cut this, I'm going to cut myself an extra inch or inch and a half so that we can cut a pattern after we've made our piece.
I'll explain the extra here in a moment.
So I'm going to cut this apart on the lines that I just drew, but we're going to save all of our pieces because we do have other cushions that we want to do, and I'm not sure what we're actually going to need of this.
This pattern was made in a previous video called How to Make a Powerboat Lounge Cushion video. If you'd like to see that, here's the search. We need to cut apart these patterns so we can pattern each of the colored vinyls.
Okay, I'm ready to cut my pieces, and this one here is cut out of the tan vinyl. And here, this is what goes down the front of my cushion, so I'm going to allow 6 or 7 inches extra. And on this edge and this edge, I want to allow about 1.5 or 2 inches.
What she means along the front edge is she needs to come around the foam and around the backer board to be stapled on the back side.
And this curved edge is where it will be seamed, so I only want to allow 1/2 an inch here.
Why the excess on the 2 ends? Because when we sew these pieces together, it's possible that we may get some shrinkage, and we want to have extra material there so we can cut it to size after it's been sewn together, all 3 of the colors, that is. Along the edge where this vinyl has to join with a second colored vinyl and be seamed together, she's adding a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and she's using the clear acrylic ruler. Notice how she moves it so she matches the edge of the pattern on the bottom side, and then marks it a 1/2 inch. Here along this one side, she needs to have excess material because the pattern we made earlier wasn't big enough to cover that area. So she measures down, making sure she has enough fabric again for possible shrinkage.
I'm going to transfer my marks of where these pieces go together so that I get them stitched back together in the right place.
These marks were placed on the pattern material before it was cut apart.
On the blue piece, I'm going to leave about 2 inches out here, 2 inches over here, and just a half an inch here and here on these curved lines where the seams will be. And in this little area right here, I need to leave the 6 or 7 inches because this is what's going to wrap down and around under the board after we make the piece.
She's patterning with the pattern facing up, so she has to mark on the vinyl material on the right side of the fabric, not the wrong side of the fabric. We're using a number 2 pencil for this.
And then we want to continue this curve out to the end of the piece, even though the edge of the board ends right here. I'm going to draw a line and continue the curve out to the edge of the piece. I'm going to draw a light line right here so I can add my half an inch to it.
We already discussed it, but this pattern was used for a different cushion. That's why it doesn't exactly fit here, and we have to add that amount here.
So it looks like we're not going to need all of this out here. We're going to add it to this piece out here when we get that far. We're going to cut this one right here.
Now cut it out along those lines you struck down. Here, it's a half inch. And here, it's a half inch. Don't forget to add your matchup marks so you know exactly where these panels need to lay next to each other. Our last color is a channeling material. We'll tape it in place first.
Okay, on this piece, we need a half an inch seam down here. This will be seamed. A couple of inches out here, and back here is where we need 6 or 7 inches.
These 6 or 7 inches will be used to wrap around the backer board.
So in order to get this corner cut correctly on this piece, I'm going to lay my blue piece on here. And I know that I need to come out this far, and I need to follow this line across. So somewhere in here, I need to meet those 2 lines to cut this correctly.
Don't forget to add the matchup marks. Now all 3 of our colored vinyl pieces are cut out to the appropriate size.
Well, before I stitch this all together, I'm going to turn it over and cut an opposite one for the other side of the seat.
As you can see here, we need 2 of them.
Before I cut my other one, these seats sit back to back, so we want the second one to be opposite so that this curve goes towards. They both end up in the center, so we're going to cut it with the right sides together for the second one so that it looks like this.
Right sides are facing each other, as shown here. We will not show cutting out the other 3 panels, but here they are done. Now we'll continue on to sewing.
Okay, we're ready to stitch these together. I'm going to start with this seam and line up my marks. And I'm going to stitch from here out and then from here out. I want to do a half an inch seam here, so I'm going to put my magnetic seam guide on. And I put my needle down right at the half an inch on my seam gauge, and then I can slide the guide right up to the gauge. And take my needle off and remove the gauge.
By starting right directly over our matchup marks, we're assured that the panels are lined up appropriately. Then we'll flip this panel over and sew the other direction down the other side. We started at the matchup marks. Now we'll flip the panel and sew the other side down the other way, matching up the edges as we sew, keeping that stitch an exact ½ inch away using the magnetic guide.
In this area right here, we're going to be doing a French seam, top stitching on both sides, on both colors here. So to make that a little bit easier and to make this seam stronger, we'll apply the grosgrain ribbon to the back. And I'm going to apply the seam stick to the grosgrain ribbon to hold it all in place when I stitch it, because I'll be stitching from the front.
A French seam, or double top stitch as it's sometimes referred to, looks great. Without this tape or strip of fabric on the back side, there is no strength in the 2 stitches that lay beside our primary stitch, so it's important to use this. Using the seam stick will help to hold it in place as we take it to the sewing machine and sew. Again, a second helper would be helpful here. One person splays the seam open, the other person bastes the tape on top of it, near the center. This 1-inch tape does not necessarily have to be directly in the center. We're going to sew very close to that first stitch, as you'll see in the next step.
Now for this row of stitching, I need to remove the seam guide, and I'm going to stitch with this edge of the presser foot right up against, following along this seam.
We did some reversing at the beginning, and here we'll do some reversing at the end, but it's really not required because we do have to cut this down to size.
Okay, before I go down this other side, I'm going to check, make sure I have enough bobbin. This is a hard place to make it look good if you run out of thread, so it's better to check first and make sure you have enough thread to do the whole seam. And it looks like I have plenty.
We want to sew that second top stitch with the same side of the presser foot. That's why we're starting from the opposite end here, so that it's still using the presser foot on the right side of the sewing machine as you face it. Here is our French seam or double top stitch.
Now we're ready to sew the channeling to our other 2 pieces, and I've got marks here and marks here that I want to match up, and I'm going to do this the same way. I'm going to stitch from here out to the end and then come back and stitch from here out to the end.
We'll use the magnetic guide, position it a ½ inch from the needle, and then we'll sew this together just as we did with the previous panels, starting from the matchup marks.
So here's where I need another ½ inch seam, and I need to be careful. This channeling will stretch as you're sewing if you're not careful with it, and I really don't want it to stretch. So I'm going to try to kind of push the channeling a little bit in as I stitch.
As Cindy tries not to stretch or shrink up the channeling, she also has to be aware of matching up the edges of both pieces because there's shape involved. So she's doing this very carefully and slowly, trying to keep the shape of the channeling fabric exactly the same as it was intended to be, not stretching or pushing it in too hard. If you so choose, you could use a 1/4 inch basting tape and pre-baste it before sewing. It's your choice. Now that that run is done, she'll flip the panel over and sew the opposite direction from the matchup marks. This time the channeling fabric will be on the underside.
Okay, on this edge here, we're not going to stitch on both sides. We decided we didn't like the way it looked. We did a sample. So I'm just going to stitch on the blue top stitching, and I'm going to push all of the seam towards the blue, and that will make this seam stronger also, to have everything going to one side and then the top stitch added to it.
Now that it's sewn on the one side, we don't have to worry about the channeling fabric stretching or being pulled too hard as we sew it. We can just concentrate on keeping that stitch at the same distance away from the first stitch.
So here's our first piece put together. We need to add some side panels to it and get it cut to size, and then we can apply it to the wooden base. This is a piece that we're going to work on next, that we just made the pattern for, of the 3 different vinyls. So this is the original piece. This is the side panel that I need to cut right now, and then we'll cut the piece that we made with the channeling down to size and put it together.
We'll pattern these sides just like we did with our side bolsters, leaving excess fabric at the bottom.
So on this piece, I'm just going to trace around where the seam is at the same size, but I'm going to give myself some extra at the bottom so I have plenty to pull with.
We need 2 of these, so we'll mirror the second one. Outside surfaces are facing each other.
And I'm going to transfer my mark that I made when the piece was still together so that I know how to put it back together. And that this is the front. We're ready to cut this piece to size, and you can see it's quite a bit bigger all the way around. I'm going to need a 1/2 inch seam on this edge and on this edge, so that's what I'm going to use to start with, leaving my pattern on there and marking a 1/2 inch seam out from the pattern.
Notice on the Durascreen pattern material the notch near Cindy. That's because this pattern was actually used for a different cushion, as we discussed earlier. We'll ignore that.
And I'll do that on both sides. Now before I move the pattern, I'm going to take my side panel and lay it up here. This piece is going to be sewn around this edge, so I want this 1/2 inch seam in this area to be a 1/2 inch beyond where I've cut my pattern.
In other words, the side boxing needs to extend past our pattern material by a 1/2 inch. So Cindy's pulling it here so it equals a 1/2 inch. Then she'll go to that match-up mark and mark it on the top portion of the cushion, what we call the plate.
Then I'm going to use the reference point that I put on the old piece and mark it on this piece so that I know where to sew this piece back to this piece.
She will follow that same procedure for the opposite boxing piece on the other side of the cushion, using it a 1/2 inch beyond the pattern, and then marking where that rests. Next, we'll cut along those lines we just struck down. The extra material that we calculated into this process was just in case it shrank. It's better to have too much than too little. We will sew the piping onto the sides of this top cushion, just as you see here. Now we need to find that match-up mark. It's buried under here someplace.
Okay, where did I put my mark? There it is. Right there.
We'll line up those marks on the top of the cushion, called the plate, with the mark on the boxing, which is the side of the cushion. Then we'll start sewing from that mark going down one direction. When we're done sewing that way, we'll flip the assembly and sew from that mark again going the other direction. Watch here. When Cindy gets to the corner, she'll take her scissors and cut some notches out of the plate where the corner will take a bend. The piping already has notches in the flange because this is a prefabricated piping, but this will help the assembly to take that turn a little bit more smoothly. He's making sure the edges of the boxing are lined up with the edge of the plate. Remember, we have excess material at the bottom, so don't be alarmed that it doesn't match up perfectly there. Flips the assembly, and she'll start sewing at that mark, approximately 1 or 2 inches over the previous stitches. Doing the same procedure. At any turns, make a few notches or one, which will help the assembly take the turn. Fabric often has to stretch at a turn, and these notches help it to stretch. If the fabric has to shrink, sometimes a notch can help it shrink as well, so relief notches are a good idea. Hopefully the stitch is inside the first stitch. That way the first stitch won't show up when the assembly is splayed apart next to the piping. So try to sew either on top of that first stitch or a little bit on the inside towards the piping itself. That will conceal that first stitch that sewed the piping to the plate. This one side is done. Now we'll repeat that process for the other. And here's what it looks like when it's turned right side out. Let's move on.
We're ready to cut our foam pieces for our back and our seat panels. We're using a high density 3-inch foam so it'll wear well for the use of the boat, and I've put these so that I get the best use out of the foam that I can. And I'm going to take the marker and just mark 1/2 inch around each edge. And we've moved this edge and this far edge over here so that we don't have to cut this one edge. And I'm going to mark these A, B, C, and D so I keep the foam with the board.
Cutting foam is not too difficult. In fact, it can often be done with an electric kitchen knife. Here we are testing a possible new professional foam cutting tool that Sailrite may carry in the future, if it passes extensive testing.
The old pieces have an angle cut in them so that when the seat folds up, it all fits together. So this angle on the old piece is about 2 inches narrower than the rest of it.
Cindy will mark the foam at 2 inches at that location all along that edge. Then she'll strike a line. After that, she'll use the foam cutter to cut the wedge or angle into the foam.
So I'm going to draw a line 2 inches into the bottom of this piece. And then when I cut, I'll be angling it like this.
Again, if you do not have a professional foam cutter like this, you could use an electric kitchen knife. It'll work in the same principle as this.
We're working on the seat to the front boat seat, and I'm going to wrap the 1/4 inch sew foam around the sides and the front edge just to take some of the, soften this little edge a little bit.
This sew foam is called polyurethane foam with fabric backing at Sailrite.com.
And before I apply the foam inside of this, I'm going to trim a little bit of this fullness out. You can see how it's rippling right here, and that's going to make it hard for this piece to lay flat. So I'm going to just cut some little triangles out of that so that it can lay a little bit flatter when I turn it over and put the foam in there. That's really a good visual right there.
Yeah. When we started upholstering this cushion, we forgot to add the silk film. Silk film is a noiseless plastic that helps to prevent water from leaking into the foam. It is a choice, but it's probably a highly recommended choice because water, when it gets inside of the polyurethane foam, takes a long time to dry out. So, had we to do this over again, we would have used the silk film here.
Okay, as I'm putting this piece on, I want to make sure that my seams are pushed to the outside. It'll make the top look smoother if everything is pushed to the outside. And the other thing I want to notice is this cording needs to come down at the corners of the wood on all 4 sides. So I'll make sure that's in place before I start stapling.
Again, the first few staples will tack the assembly in place. We do not want to staple around the entire perimeter with staples very close to each other, just enough to determine if it's in the right spot. If it isn't, we can remove the staples and reposition it. Notice that Cindy is pulling the vinyl fabric very taut indeed as she staples it in place. Cindy's happy with the way it looks. Now she'll go ahead and staple it more securely, putting staples every inch or so. Cutting out some of the fabric at the corner will allow the corner to take the turn a little bit more smoothly. Along the underside, no one will be seeing this. If you notice that a staple is possibly placed in the wrong spot and the fabric is not tight enough, go ahead and pull it out. It's easy to restaple it in that location. Here she believes this staple that originally tacked the assembly down is in the wrong spot, so she can pull the vinyl up tighter and restaple it. That is not uncommon.
Still gonna have that little dimple there, I think.
We're going to skip ahead here and show you the finished product that will go in between our side bolsters. Looks good. This video tutorial focused on the upholstery portion of the back-to-back lounge seat. We did not cover the seat's backrest, but it's done in a similar manner as what you have just viewed here for the seat bottom. The assembly of components varies from seat to seat, so we will not cover this process. Basically, reassemble the seat in the same manner it was disassembled. Inserting a vinyl strip of fabric between the hinge and backer board will help protect the vinyl fabric that has been upholstered to the seat. We did not show the process for the backrest portion of this seat, but it's done in the same manner as what you already viewed in this video. Here's the completed back-to-back lounge seat. Coming up next is the materials list and tools list that we use to reupholster this captain's seat. Be sure to visit Sailrite.com for all kinds of great high-quality vinyl products that you can use for your next upholstery job. If you have any questions regarding the materials that we used or the tools that we used, be sure to give us a call or email us at Sailrite. We did not show the process of making this cover out of Fifertex Plus. This has a double hem around the perimeter and snaps that hold it to the base of the chair to hide the opening for the compartment underneath. After the upholstery was done on this boat, you can see here that Brian made a bimini with an aft extension using Sunbrella fabric. He also made a full enclosure. And as you can also see here, Sunbrella leather cloths. For more free videos like this, be sure to check out the Sailrite website or subscribe to the Sailrite YouTube channel. It's your loyal patronage to Sailrite that makes these free videos available. Thanks for your loyal support. I'm Eric Grant, and from all of us here at Sailrite, thanks for watching.